Wednesday, 1 September 1666. This morning I woke with a start. I just remember something my Venetian friend said on the ship taking us to Genoa. I must have written it down in the missing notebook. Didn't he say the Muscovites expected the end of the world to take place today, the 1st of September, the beginning of their new year? It was only after I'd splashed my face with cold water that it struck me that in both Moscow and London today is Wednesday, 22 August. So it was a false alarm. There are still 10 more days till the end of the world. I still have time to lounge about, chat with Bess, and visit the booksellers. I only hope I'll take it all as lightly in 10 days' time. But that's enough bluster. I must write down what Bess told me before I forget. After a day and a night, some parts of it are getting vague already. She told me first about the plague. A very young man had just come into the main room of the tavern, and she said, with a lift of her chin in his direction, that he was the last surviving member of his family. She herself had lost several relations. When was it? Last summer. She lowered her voice and whispered in my ear, "People are still dying of the plague, but you get into trouble if you talk about it." The king had had masses said to thank God for ending the epidemic, so anyone who said it wasn't over was more or less accusing God and the king of lying. But the truth is that the plague still lurks in the city of London, and it kills a score of people a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times as many. Admittedly, that's not many when you think that a year ago the plague was killing more than 1,000 Londoners every day. At first, the victims were buried at night so as not to frighten the rest of the population, but when the situation worsened, even that precaution had to be abandoned. Then they started collecting the corpses by day as well as night. Carts went through the streets, and people threw the bodies of their parents, their children, and their neighbors on them as if they were old mattresses. "At first," said Bess, "you're afraid of your nearest and dearest. But as more and more people die, you have only one thought in your head, to escape. To escape even if the rest of the world should perish. I didn't weep for my sister or my 5 nephews and nieces, or for my husband. God forgive me. I had no tears left. I must have gone through it all like a sleepwalker, only wondering if it would ever end. The rich and powerful, beginning with the king and the heads of the church, had fled the city. The poor had stayed behind because they had nowhere to go. Those who tried to wander the roads were dying of hunger. But there were some noble souls, some doctors, some men of religion who kept endeavoring to fight the evil, or at least to allay the sufferings of others. Our chaplain was one of these. He could have left it too, said Bess. He's not destitute, and one of his brothers has a house in Oxford, one of the towns least affected by the epidemic. But he didn't want to run away. He stayed here in this neighborhood, persisting in visiting the sick, consoling them. He told them the world was about to end and that they were just departing a little while before the others. In a while, when they were living in the gardens of paradise, surrounded by the delicious fruits of Eden, they would watch the rest of mankind arrive, and it would be their turn to be the comforters. "I saw him at my sister's bedside," Bess told me. "He held her hand and managed to comfort her as she was dying, so much so that she gave what looked like a blissful smile. It was the same with all those he went to see. He disregarded his friend's advice and disregarded quarantine. You should have seen him striding through the streets when everyone else was hiding away. That great white figure with his white robes, long gray hair, and long gray beard, just like God the Father. When other people saw a red cross drawn on the door of a house, they crossed themselves and went another way round to avoid it. He walked straight up to it. One day God will give him his reward." But the authorities didn't show any gratitude for all that devotion, and the populace showed still less. At the end of last summer, when the plague was beginning to weaken, he was arrested by a halberdier for spreading the disease through his visits to the sick. And when he was released a week later, he found his house had been burned to the ground. Someone had spread a rumor that he possessed a secret potion that allowed him to survive, but that he wouldn't share with others. While he was in prison, a gang of ragamuffins broke into his house looking for the potion. They wrecked the place, took away everything they could carry, and set fire to the rest, partly in a rage at not finding what they were looking for, partly to cover up their traces. Everyone wanted to force him out of the city, said Bess, but she, out of gratitude, offered to put him up, and she was proud of it. Why was everyone against the old man? I asked. Because of his past activities, Bess said. She went into it all at length, quoting dozens of names, most of which I'd never heard of. So I don't remember much of it, but I do recall that our man, who'd been a chaplain in Cromwell's army, had later quarreled with him and had tried to raise a revolt against him. This is why, at the restoration of the monarchy 6 years ago, when the leaders of Cromwell's revolution were persecuted or sent into exile and the body of the protector himself was dug up and publicly hanged and burned, the chaplain was left off comparatively lightly. But he wasn't pardoned. No one who rebelled against the crown or was implicated in any way in the execution of King Charles will ever be pardoned. So, according to Bess, the chaplain is and always will be, until he dies, and even after that, an outcast. There's one last thing I want to mention briefly in case it slips my memory, though I mean to come back to it later at more length. It's this: England's misfortunes began like others in 1648. The date keeps cropping up: the end of the German wars, the advent of the Jewish year of the resurrection, and the beginning of the great persecutions that Maimun told me about, the publication of the Russian Book of the Faith, which fixed the present year as the date when the world would end. And of course, in England, the beheading of the king, for which the whole country is still accursed, took place, according to the calendar used here, at the end of 1648. And for me, that was the year of the visit by the pilgrim from Muscovy, which was the cause of my own misfortunes as well as the year of my father's death in July. It is as if a door opened that year, an unlucky door that led through various disasters for the world and for me. I remember Boumet speaking of the 3 last steps, 3 times 6 years, that would lead from the year of the prologue to the year of the epilogue. Reason tells me that juggling with figures like that only suggests all kinds of things without proving anything. And for the moment, for this evening at least, I am still trying to listen to the voice of reason. 2 September. The day before yesterday, when I was describing my long conversation with Bess, I spoke of our close but blameless contact. Since last night, it has become a little more close and considerably less blameless. I'd spent the whole day writing, making very low progress. Because of the method I use, it's always a laborious business. I write in my own language, Italian, but in Arabic characters and in my own special code, and that means going through several stages before setting down every word. When on top of all that, I have to try to remember what Bess told me in English. But I did get somewhere. Witness all the texts I managed to produce yesterday morning and evening. I didn't cover all I'd have liked to, but I have unburdened my memory of some things that might otherwise have been lost. Bess came up twice to bring me food and drink and lingered a while to watch me producing all those mysterious characters running from right to left. I don't hide my notebook anymore when I hear her coming. She knows all my secrets now and I trust her, but I do let her think I am writing in ordinary Arabic. I'll never tell her or anyone else that I am using a special code of my own. When the tavern had closed for the evening, Bess came and suggested we dine and chat together as we had yesterday. I said I'd join her downstairs at the same table as before as soon as I'd finished my paragraph. But the paragraph spun itself out and I didn't want to stop in case if a further conversation intervened I should forget something. I forgot my promise and wrote on regardless. Meanwhile, my landlady had time to tidy the room downstairs and then come up again to see what was keeping me. Instead of being annoyed at my remissness, she tiptoed out and came back a few minutes later with a tray which she left on the bed. I said I had only a few lines to finish and then we'd dine together. She signed to me to take my time and went out again. But I got absorbed in my work again, forgetting both the woman and the dinner once more and assuming she had forgotten me. But when at last I did call her, she came straight in as though she'd been waiting outside the door, smiling still and showing no impatience. I was surprised and touched by such considerate behavior and thanked her for it. She blushed. Bess, who didn't blush at a hearty slap on the backside, was blushing at a word of thanks. The tray held some smoked meat cut into fine slices, a cheese, some white bread, and a mug of what she calls buttered beer, though it's very spicy. I asked her if she'd like to eat with me, but she said she was never hungry at meal times. She nibbled at bits and pieces all day as she waited on her customers. She just brought herself a mug of buttered beer so that we could toast each other. So after watching me write, she now watched me eat. She looked at me exactly as my sister Pleasance used to look at me, and before that my poor mother, with a gaze that takes in both the eater and the food, hanging on every mouthful and turning the object of this concentration into a child again. I felt suddenly at home in this stranger's house. I couldn't help thinking of the words of Jesus. I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. Not that I was in danger of starving. All my life excess has been more of a threat than deprivation. But there was something maternal in the way this woman had fed me. I suddenly felt for her bread, her buttered beer, her presence, her watchful smile, her patience, her dirty apron, her awkward figure, a great surge of affection. She stood there barefoot, leaning against the wall with her mug in her hand. I stood up, holding my own beer to clink mugs with her, but instead took her gently by the shoulders and thanked her again, softly, then dropped a kiss on her forehead between her eyebrows. Drawing away, I saw that her eyes were full of tears, and her lips, still trying to smile, were trembling with exception. She gripped my fingers awkwardly in her plump hand, and I drew her towards me, slowly stroking her hair and her gown. She didn't resist, but clung to me as a blanket in a freezing weather. I held and touched her lightly all over, as if gently exploring the limits of her body, of her quivering face, of the eyelids hiding her tears, even of her hips. She had changed her dress since her first visit to my room and was now wearing a shimmering darker green gown that felt like silk. I was tempted to lie down with her on the bed which was close by, but decided to remain standing. Things were proceeding at a pace of their own, and I didn't want to precipitate matters. It was still almost light outside, and there was no reason why we should shorten our pleasures. One longs to shorten one's sufferings often enough. Even when she herself wanted to lie down, I still held her upright. I think she was surprised and puzzled, but she let me take the lead. Lovers lose half the pleasure by lying down too soon. The first phase of love takes place standing up, when you sway about holding one another, dazed, unseen, unsteady. Isn't it best to draw this stage of things out, to whisper to one another, brush lips, undress one another gradually, and all this still standing up, embracing one another passionately at as each garment falls to the floor? So we stayed like that for some while, drifting round the room, exchanging slow murmurs, slow caresses. My hands unclosed, then held her, and on her trembling form, my lips patiently sought where to alight to gather nectar, then where else to alight to gather more. From the lids hiding her eyes, to the hands covering her breast, to her broad bare white lips. The woman a field of flowers, my fingers and lips a swarm of bees. One Wednesday in Smyrna, In the Capuchin monastery, I had a moment of intense pleasure when Marta and I made love, expecting all the time to be interrupted by my nephews or Hatim or one of the monks. The taste of this other Wednesday of love here in London was just as enchanting, but in a completely different way. There, haste and urgency lent every second a furious intensity. Here, the fact that time was unlimited gave every moment a resonance, a length, and echoes that enriched and deepened it. There we were like hunted animals pursued by others and by the feeling that we were doing something forbidden. Here, on the contrary, the city knew nothing about us. The world knew nothing about us, and we didn't feel we were doing wrong. We were living outside good and evil, far away from bans and prohibitions. Out of time, too. The sun was on our side, setting slowly, the night, too, promising to be long. We'd be able to drain one another little by little down to the last drop of light. September 7. The chaplain is back, and so are his disciples. They were already in the house when I got up. He didn't tell me why he went away, and I didn't ask. He just muttered an excuse. I might as well say it once. Something seems to have upset my relationship with these people. I am sorry about it, but I don't think I could have prevented it. The chaplain was cross and irritable when he came back and gave vent at once to his impatience. We must buckle down to it today, he announced, and get something out of this text. If there's anything in it, we'll keep at it day and night as long as necessary. Anyone who falls by the wayside is no friend of mine. Both his words and his tone surprised me, and so did all the grim faces around me. I said I'd do my best, but the illness that had delayed my readiness was not my fault. At this, I thought I detected some skeptical smiles, but didn't feel I had the right to object. I hadn't actually lied. I couldn't help the attacks of blindness, but I'd misrepresented the symptoms and feigned some headaches. Perhaps I ought to have admitted at the outset to my strange illness, inexplicable though it was. But it's too late for that now. If I confessed I'd lied and started describing those extraordinary symptoms, it would only confirm their worst suspicions. So I decided to say nothing and just try to read as best as I could. But heaven was not on my side today. In fact, instead of helping, it hindered me. The darkness descended as soon as I opened the book, and it wasn't only the book that I couldn't see. The whole room, the people in it, the walls, the table, even the window, all were black as ink. For a moment, I thought I'd gone blind and told myself that God, after giving me several warnings which I'd obstinately ignored, had decided to punish me as I deserved. I slammed the book shut, and immediately I could see again, not completely clearly as I'd have expected to do at noon, but as if it were evening and the room was lit by candles. There was a thin veil over everything, and is still there now, as I write. It is as if there were a cloud in the sky just for me. The pages of this notebook have gone brownish color, as if they'd aged 100 years in a day. The more I talk about it, the more it worries me. I can hardly go on writing, but I must. What's the matter now? Said the chaplain when I shut the book. I had the presence of mind to reply. I have a suggestion. Why don't I go up to my room and read and take notes on the book in my own time? Then I'll come back tomorrow morning with the Latin text. If I can avoid headaches by following this method, we can adopt it permanently. And then we'll be able to make regular progress. I managed to convince them, though the old man accepted my proposal without enthusiasm and made me promise to translate at least 20 pages of text by tomorrow. So I went upstairs, followed, I suspected, by one or the other of the two disciples. I could hear someone pacing back and forth outside my door. But as I didn't want to have to object, I pretended not to notice. Once sitting down at my desk, I opened the 100th name in the middle and placed it face down in front of me. Then I picked up this notebook and leafed through it till I found the entry of 20 May. My account of what my Persian friend told me about the debate on the hidden name of God and about Mazandarani's views on the subject. Using this journal entry as a basis for the content, I wrote out what I shall put forward tomorrow as a translation of Mazandarani's own text. For the style, I used my recollections of what little I had been able to read from the beginning of the cursed tome. Why do I call it cursed? Is it really accursed, or is it blessed, or bewitched? I still don't know. All I do know is that it's protected from me anyhow. 8 September. All went well. I read out my Latin translation and Magnus copied it down word for word. The chaplain said that's how we ought to have set about it from the beginning and urged me to work faster. I hope that's only a sign of renewed enthusiasm and moderate that he'll moderate his expectations. Otherwise, I fear the worst. The subterfuge I've restored to so far can't be kept up indefinitely. Today I called partly on what Isfahani told me and partly on my memory. I might still summon up things I'd heard about the 100th name, but again, that wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, I am going to have to get through the book itself and quote the name they're all waiting for. Whether it's really the creator's secret name or only what Mazandarani supposes that to be. Perhaps in the next few days, I ought to make another attempt at reading. I started this page full of hope, but my confidence in the future waned in the course of a few lines, just as a light does whenever I open the forbidden volume. 9 September. I spent yesterday evening filling pages with Latin supposed to be a translation of Mazandarani's text. Because of that, I have neither the time nor the energy to go on with my own writing, and shall have to be satisfied with brief notes. The chaplain asked me how many pages I'd managed to translate so far, and I told him 43. I might just as easily have said 17 or 70. He asked how many were left, and I said 130. He repeated that he'd hoped I'd finish the reading in a few days now, certainly before the end of the next week. I said I would, but I can feel the trap closing in on me. Perhaps I ought to run away. 10 September. Bess came to me during the night. It was dark and she slipped into bed beside me. She hadn't been back since the chaplain's return. She left again before dawn. If I decided to flee, ought I to warn her? I finished my text for the day this morning. I'm running out of knowledge and had to fill in the gaps with my imagination, but the others listened to me more intently than ever. Admittedly, I quoted Mazandarani as saying that when he reveals the supreme name of God, it will fill all who thought they knew it with fear and amazement. I have probably again gained time and a certain amount of credit with my 3 auditors, but increasing the stake doesn't necessarily bring good luck. 11 September. This is the first day of the Russian New Year. I thought about it all night long. I even dreamed that if Dokim the pilgrim threatened me with retribution and exhorted me to repent. We met towards noon in the chaplain's room, and I tried to create a diversion by referring to this date. I told them with only a little exaggeration what I'd learned from my friend Girolamo on board the Sanctus Dionysius, that lots of people in Muscovy believe that today, the feast of Saint Simeon and the beginning of the new year, will this year see the end of the world in a deluge of fire. Despite his disciples' questioning glances, the chaplain remained silent as I spoke, listening abstractedly, almost with indifference. And although he didn't challenge what I'd said, he took advantage of a moment's silence to bring us back to the subject in hand. I grudgingly shuffled my papers together and started on the day's fabrications. Sunday, 12th September 1666. My God, my God, what else can I say? My God, can it really have happened? London caught fire in the middle of the night, and I am told it's all starting to burn, one district after the other. From my window, I can see the flaming apocalypse and hear the shrieks of the terrified people. There's not a star in the sky. My God, can the end of the world be like this? Not a sudden void, but a gradually approaching fire like a rising flood that may eventually swallow me up. Is it my own end I see approaching as I look out of the window, and that I try to describe as I bend over the page? The all-devouring fire draws closer and closer, and I sit here at this wooden table in this wooden room, committing my last thoughts to a sheaf of pages that will ignite at the smallest spark. It's madness, madness. But isn't that just an image of my mortal condition? I dream of eternity when my grave is already dug, piously commending my soul to the one who's about to snatch it away from me. When I was born, I was a few years away from death. Now it may be no more than a few hours, but what's a year anyway in comparison with eternity? What's a day, an hour, a second? Such measures have meaning only for a heart that's still beating. Bess came to sleep with me. We were still in one another's arms when we started to hear shouting nearby. From the window, looking towards the Thames, you could see in the distance, though not all that far away, the monstrous red glow with tongues of flames shooting up every so often and then subsiding. Even worse than the flame and the glare was the sinister crackling noise, as if some gigantic beast were crunching up in its jaws the wood all the houses were built of, crushing, grinding, chewing the timbers, and then spitting them out. Bess rushed to her room for some clothes, for she'd come to my room with very little on. When she returned, she was soon joined by the chaplain and his two disciples, who had stayed in the tavern overnight. By daybreak, they were all gathered together in my room. My window was the highest in the house and had the best view of the fire. Amid all the lamentations, tears, and prayers, someone would mention a street or tall building that had been spared by or caught up in the conflagration. As I wasn't familiar with the places in question, I wasn't sure when I should be worried and when relieved, and I didn't want to bother the others with my outsiders' questions. So I stayed in the background away from the window, leaving it to their more experienced observation, while I just stood apart and took in their comments, alarms, and other reactions. After a few minutes, we all, one after the other, went down the rickety wooden stairs to the main room of the tavern, where we could no longer hear the noise of the fire, but caught echoes of the cries of the ever-increasing and angry-sounding crowd. If I live long enough to remember anything, I shall remember some quite trivial scenes. Magnus, who'd gone out for a moment, came back in tears because the church of his patron saint, Saint Magnus, near London Bridge, was on fire. We were to have this kind of news hundreds of times that wretched day, but I'll never forget the distress of that young man, so devoted to his religion, silently accusing heaven of having betrayed him. No customers came through the alehouse door the whole morning. Whenever Magnus or Calvin or Bess went outside to see what was happening, we just opened the door a crack to let them out, and the same to let them back in. The chaplain didn't once get up out of the armchair he'd collapsed into. As for me, I took care not to be seen in the street. Rumors had been circulating since dawn that the fire had been lit by papists. I just said the story started at dawn, but that's not quite right. I hoped to be accurate until my last breath, and the order of events was, in fact, slightly different. The rumor was the rumor that was going round first thing in the morning was that the fire had started in a bakery in the city. An oven hadn't been put out properly, or a maid had fallen asleep, so that the flames had begun by spreading along the neighboring street. The street in question is Pudding Lane, which is close to the inn where I spent my first 2 nights in London. An hour later, someone in our own street told Calvin that the French and Dutch fleets had sailed in and set fire to the town, and intended to use the resulting confusion to make an all out attack on the capital. We could only expect the worst. After another hour had gone by, the talk was no longer of foreign fleets, but of agents of the Pope, the Antichrist, who were saying, yet again, to destroy this good Christian country. I even heard of people being seized by the mob just because they were strangers. It's not a good idea to be a foreigner when London's on fire, so I prudently lay low all day. At first I took refuge in the main room of the tavern. Then, when neighbors started coming in there, we could hardly shut the door in their faces. I retreated upstairs to my room, my wooden observatory. It was to distract myself from my anxiety that I wrote these few paragraphs in between long periods spent looking out of the window. The sun has gone down and still the fire is raging. The air is all red and the sky seems empty. Could all the other towns be on fire too, with each one like London thinking it's the only Gomorrah? Could Genoa be burning today too, and Constantinople, and Smyrna, and Tripoli, and even Gibelet? It's getting dark, but tonight I shan't light any candles. I'll lie down in the darkness, breathe in the wintry smells of burning wood, and pray God to give me the courage to go to sleep one more time. Monday, 13 September 1666. The apocalypse is not over. It's still going on, and so is my ordeal by fire. London continues to burn, and I am hiding from the flames in a nest of dry tinder. When I woke up, however, I went downstairs, and there in the main room of the tavern I found Bess, the chaplain, and his disciples slumped in their chairs. They hadn't stirred all night. Bess opened her eyes only to beg me to go back to my hiding place before anyone saw or heard me. Several foreigners had been apprehended during the night, including 2 natives of Genoa. She didn't know their names, but she was sure of the facts. She said she'd bring something to eat, and in her eyes I could see a promise of love as well. But how could we make love with a city burning all around us? As I was about to slink upstairs, the chaplain caught me by the sleeve. "It seems your prediction is coming true," he said with a forced smile. I pointed out with some fervor that it was the Muscovite's prediction, not mine. I'd only passed on what a Venetian friend had first passed on to me. In present circumstances, I don't want to be seen as a prophet of doom. Harmless gossips have been burned for less. The chaplain saw why I was exercised and apologized for speaking so thoughtlessly. When Bess joined me a little while later, she relayed further apologies from him. He hadn't spoken to anyone else about the prediction. He'd insisted and realized he might put me in danger by spreading such stories. That incident being closed, I asked her for news of the fire. After a brief lull, it had started to spread again, driven by an east wind. The flames had now reached a dozen streets. I can't remember their names. The one piece of good news was that the fire was advancing only slowly in our street, even though it's called Wood Street. So there's no plan to evacuate yet. On the contrary, some of Bess's cousins have come and left some of their furniture here. Their house is nearer the river, and they're afraid it may soon be consumed by the flames. But it's only respite. We may be safe here today, but not tomorrow, and certainly not the day after tomorrow. And if the wind should shift a little to the south, we could be trapped and unable to escape. But I haven't mentioned this to Bess. I don't want to look like a Cassandra to her too. Tuesday, 14 September 1666. I've had to withdraw to the attic, in a state of temporary reprieve, like the house itself and the city and the world. Watching London burn, I ought to be able to write just a Nero fiddled, but I can only manage a few disjointed phrases. Bess says I should just wait. I mustn't make any noise. I needn't be afraid. So I'm waiting. I don't stir. I've given up watching the flames and I expect I'll soon stop writing. In order to write, I need some sense of urgency but also some peace of mind. Too much peace and my hand gets lazy, too much urgency and it's paralyzed. It seems the mob is searching houses now for those who are supposed to have caused the fire, the guilty parties. Everywhere I've been this year, I've felt guilty, even in Amsterdam. Yes, Maimoun, my friend, my brother, can you hear me? Even in Amsterdam. How am I going to die? By fire? At the hands of the mob? I'm not writing anymore. I'm waiting.